Whenever you're ready.
Okay. um, I'm Isaac, and I'm going to be refuting Sarah's claim of fact speech that animal testing is unnecessary. Her first two supporting claims, after searching for a while, were that animal testing is outdated and irrelevant, and that there are better alternatives. So her first point in that animal testing is outdated and irrelevant is that she says that, or she paraphrases New York Times and says that this is something we needed back in 1860. Now we don't need it now. And then she comes up with a number saying, quote, let's say we had 100. If we had 100 medical breakthroughs from 1860 to today, the comparison just isn't worth it. Now, obviously, I couldn't find the amount of breakthroughs we've had with animal testing from 1860 to today, but I did find a number of very important medical breakthroughs that actually are still being found today with animal testing from understandinganimalresearch.org. A list of them would be blood transfusion, insulin, anesthetics, antidepressants, penicillin, penicillin antibiotics, hip bone replacement, antidepressants, if I think I said that already, asthma inhalers, MRI screenings, HIV antiretrovirals, and cervical cancer vaccines, and most recently stem cell repair. So I think with looking at all those very important and major medical breakthroughs that it's still worth to have animal testing. Her other point, she quotes Scientist magazine that says 9 out of 10 of every candidate for medical drugs fail when given to humans. Not from Scientist magazine when I was researching. It's actually from Humane Society International, which when I did a little more research into that, they had a quote on their website that said that we are the biggest organization in animal protection. So that might say that they're a little biased. But I did a little more research again and found that although it's true that 9 out of 10 fail, or 90% or 88%, the number varies all the time. Going into the backstory of how those go on, there's different stages of how the drugs get tested before they're given to animals. First, they put them in computer simulations. According to Animal Research, understandinganimalresearch.org again, they go through computer simulations, cell culture tests, metabolic screenings, and more to find if the medicine is going to be toxic or if it's going to be, or if it's just not going to work. So they use those methods of separating the bad from the good. So then after separating the bad from, or not separating the bad from the possibly working. So after separating the bad from possibly working using alternatives that anti-animal testing people have constantly been asking for them to use, it still comes out to 9 out of 10 fail. So her third point was that companies are in financial gain, and that's a default method. She doesn't cite this at all, so I could not find anything to combat it. She also comes out with a comparison, or an example, that if somebody finds a product and it says tested on animals, they'll have one of two reactions, which divides an audience. So it really makes no sense of why a company would be in financial gain if their product is going to divide an audience. They might as well go one way and go this way, or go another way and go the other way. Her secondary point is that there are better alternatives. She says that there's human clinical studies, where you just take skin tissue and eye tissue and study it. Honestly, and she says it's cheaper too, which goes back to her argument that they're in financial gain. Again, if they're in financial gain of using animal tested products, but to her it's more expensive, then why would they not be using the more cheaper alternative? Regardless, according to procon.org, there is no adequate alternative to whole body systems. Human and animal bodies are extremely complex, and while studying cell culture in a petri dish is useful, it does not give the advantage of studying interrelated processes in the immune system, endocrine system, and the nervous system. She also lists biopsy and autopsy research, which is when you study the body after it's dead. Again, according to procon.org, they said that that a drug needs a circular system to carry a living circular system to carry the body or the drug around to different organs. So obviously the body can't do that when it's dead. And you can't really study a body for effects after it's dead as well, because you can't study eye tissue or anything, even brain tissue after it's dead, because according to the Museum of Body Science, it says that after death, the brain cells begin to die, and the tissue begins to die as well. Skin begins to die off. Blood begins to pool, so not even entering a drug is going to work, because there's nothing to pump the drug around to any part of the body. So it really doesn't work. So in conclusion, I refuted her argument that animal testing is outdated and irrelevant, and that there are better alternatives. Thank you.
Right, all the structural stuff was clear. You labeled the advocate's claim and the secondary points pretty reasonably. The argument about the paraphrasing of the New York Times and how many breakthroughs we've had in 100 years, I think you kind of respond to it in an appropriate generic way, suggesting, look, there have been a significant number of breakthroughs that we can talk about that continue. So the idea that we only had 100 maybe is an artificial notion. And then you list a whole bunch of things that are recent breakthroughs that suggest that there continues to be some advantage here. And that makes an argument that says animals are used in those processes. I think your evidence could be a little bit more explicit there, but I get the general idea there. This is not something that's old news. This is new news. This is not, we're opening up animals to discover something about the circulatory system because we were unwilling to open up human beings 150 years ago. It's really more about looking at the processes as they apply to new chemical entities or surgical techniques or that sort of thing. So I thought that was pretty reasonable. The challenge on the Humane Society International, I think we already talked about that a little bit. The notion that they have a point of view doesn't necessarily mean that they're biased. If their point of view is informed by extremities or passions or some kind of ethical question or reasonableness, then I think that that's a good press. One of the reasons that I always discourage people from citing PETA on topics like this is because the PETA organization is an extremist group when it comes to their beliefs and philosophies. And even though they often cite valid information because they have that negative connotation that goes along with it, I think a lot of people just kind of shut down and tune out, saying, oh, well, there go the PETA crazy people. And they've got nobody to blame but themselves because they have some pretty strong opinions. Basically we're all slave owners because we have pets And the truth is, any pet that, well, they're just nuts. Sorry. So they've got a whole extreme view of the world, and I think that would be a good press. But you don't really have anything specific on this group, so I think that that's a little bit problematic. And it's especially problematic when you then concede that they've got the accurate statistic, that it's 9 out of 10 or 88%, there's a little bit of variation. So if that's the thing that's being quoted and you're going to concede that it's accurate, then a challenge on it being biased doesn't make much sense. So it would be, I think it's a little bit better argument that you make after that, which suggests, look, those statistics would apply to all kinds of research that's also being done, including the kind of research that animal advocates advocate that we use. The cell studies, the computer studies, the metabolic studies, and all those kinds of things. And I thought that was a very reasonable answer. You started talking about the stages of research. I thought that we were going to get a little bit more of that also, because let's face it, it's not like they go from drugs to animals to the general population immediately. There are always human trials in between, and it seems like that's one of the things that never gets discussed, because after the animals are tested on, then they test all the drugs on a human population before they release it to general population. And so the idea that you don't screen at every opportunity that you get, I think that's maybe the argument to be making there. I do like the challenge that you make about the financial gain. Look, if it's cheaper to do these other things, then it seems like it would be inherently beneficial for the researchers and the manufacturers and the pharmaceutical companies to use the ones that are cheaper if they worked. And I think that's a very logical inference that you're making there. You kind of challenged the use of other alternatives, and you've got good reasons why those other alternatives don't work, and I thought you did a nice job outlining those and explaining them for the most part. All right, and the summary was fine, so I yammered on too long.